The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days, and neither had the sound Lily Ashford couldn't explain, a slow, deliberate scraping against her cabin's back wall every night at exactly 2:47 a.m. She told herself it was branches. She told herself a lot of things that week, right up until the morning she found 5-fingered handprints pressed into the frost on her window, from the outside, too high for any ordinary man to reach. If you've ever felt someone watching over you in the dark without knowing why, stay until the very last word of this story, because what Lily discovers about her silent protector will change how you think about love, monsters, and the thin, trembling line between them. The forest around Black Hollow Ridge had a way of swallowing sound. Lily had moved there 8 months ago, after the funeral, after the divorce papers, after her mother's voice on the phone saying you need somewhere quiet to heal, sweetheart, and quiet was exactly what Black Hollow gave her. Too quiet, some nights. The kind of quiet that pressed against her eardrums like water. She was 26, a wildlife photographer who hadn't picked up her camera in months, living off savings and a stubborn refusal to go back to the city that had broken her. The cabin had been her grandfather's, small, timber-framed, with a wraparound porch that groaned under her boots and a wood stove that ate through logs faster than she could split them. She liked it that way. Splitting wood gave her hands something honest to do while her mind sorted through the wreckage of the life she'd left behind. She hadn't expected the outbreak. Nobody had, not really, not the slow, creeping kind that didn't announce itself with sirens and evacuation orders, but crept in sideways through a research facility 2 counties over, through soldiers who came home wrong, through neighbors who stopped answering their doors. By the time the news called it what it was, half the state had already gone dark. Black Hollow Ridge, isolated and forgotten, became an island in a very quiet, very dangerous sea. Lily told herself she was safe up here. Told herself the fences her grandfather had built, rusted as they were, would hold against anything that came wandering through the pines. She was wrong, and she knew it the night the fence didn't matter at all. It happened on a Tuesday, she remembered because she'd been marking days on a paper calendar taped to the fridge, a habit that made the isolation feel less like drowning. She'd gone out at dusk to check the rain barrel, flashlight in one hand, and the first sound she heard wasn't the creak of pines. It was breathing. Wrong breathing, wet, ragged, too slow to be human panic and too aware to be animal instinct. 3 of them emerged from the tree lean like something poured from a nightmare, gray-skinned and hollow-eyed, moving with that horrible stuttering gait that had haunted every broadcast she'd watched before the signal died completely. Lily didn't scream. She'd read enough, seen enough, to know screaming was a death sentence. She ran instead, flashlight beam swinging wild across the dark, boots slipping on wet pine needles, heart slamming so hard it hurt. She didn't make it to the porch. Her ankle caught a root, and the world tilted, and she went down hard enough to see stars scatter across her vision. She rolled onto her back in time to see the nearest one lunging, jaw unhinged in a way that shouldn't have been anatomically possible, and she threw her arm up, a useless, instinctive gesture against something that could tear through bone like wet paper. The blow never came. Something crashed into the creature from the side with the force of a freight train, and Lily watched, frozen, disbelieving, as a figure drove it into a nearby tree with a sound like splintering wood. The other 2 hesitated, some dim animal calculation flickering behind their ruined eyes, and then they turned and loped back into the dark, as if some deeper instinct told them this new thing was more dangerous than they were. Silence returned. Rain kept falling. The figure remained crouched over the fallen creature for a long moment, unmoving, and Lily realized with a jolt of terror that whoever had just saved her life hadn't turned around yet. She scrambled backward on her palms, breath coming in ragged gasps, and it was only then that he rose. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a torn flannel jacket that looked older than she was. His movements were careful, deliberate, almost pained, the movements of someone holding something back with tremendous effort. When he finally turned to face her, the porch light caught his features, and Lily's scream died somewhere in her throat. His skin held a grayish undertone, veins visible beneath it like faint blue rivers under frost. One side of his jaw bore old scarring, healed but wrong, the kind of wound that should have killed a man. His eyes, though, his eyes were the most human thing Lily had ever seen. Dark, warm, achingly sad, and fixed on her with an expression that wasn't hunger. It was fear. Fear that she would run. Fear, she would later understand, that she would look at him the way the rest of the world had learned to look at anything infected, as a thing to be destroyed rather than a person still trapped somewhere inside. "Don't," he said, his voice low and rough, like it hadn't been used in a long time. "Please. I won't hurt you." Lily's whole body trembled, some primal instinct screaming at her to flee, but something else, something quieter, more curious, kept her rooted to the muddy ground. He hadn't attacked her. He'd saved her, thrown himself between her and something monstrous with a violence that should have terrified her more than it did. "What?" Her voice cracked. She tried again. "What are you?" Something flickered across his face, grief, maybe, or shame. "I don't have a good answer for that anymore." He took a slow step back, giving her room, giving her space to run if she chose. "My name's Ronan. I used to be," he stopped, jaw tightening. "It doesn't matter what I used to be." Lily forced herself upright, ankle throbbing, eyes never leaving him. Up close, in the wash of the porch light, she could see the strange duality of him more clearly, the gray pallor fighting against something stubbornly, achingly human beneath it. A 5 o'clock shadow. A small scar above his eyebrow that looked decades old, from some ordinary mishap in an ordinary life he must have had once. He looked like a man wearing a costume of monstrosity that didn't quite fit. "You're one of them," she whispered. "Infected." "Half," he said quietly. "There's a version of it, rare, doctors used to call it partial conversion, before there were no doctors left to call it anything. The infection doesn't finish. It just stops. Leaves you caught between." His hands, she noticed, were shaking slightly, clenched at his sides like he was fighting the urge to reach for her, or perhaps fighting something far darker. "I've been fighting it back for 3 years. 3 years. The number hit her strangely, lodged somewhere behind her ribs. 3 years of fighting a war inside his own body, alone, in a forest full of things that wanted to finish what the infection had started. "Why did you save me?" she asked. Ronan's throat worked. For a long moment he didn't answer, and the rain filled the silence between them, cold and steady. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper, something that sounded like a confession he hadn't meant to make. "Because I've been watching this cabin for 3 years, Lily. Long before you ever moved in." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward through her chest. She stared at him, uncomprehending, rain plastering her hair to her face. "That's not possible. I only just—" "Your grandfather," Ronan said gently, "used to leave food out on the back porch. He never asked questions. Never told anyone what he saw out here at night. A ghost of something, not quite a smile, too sad for that, touched the corner of his mouth. He knew what I was, and he treated me like a person anyway. When he passed, I kept the fences mended. Kept the wolves and worse away from this place. I told myself it was for him. For his memory. His dark eyes lifted to hers, and there was something raw and unguarded in them now, something that made her breath catch. But it became about you, too. The moment you arrived. Lily's mind reeled, trying to reconcile the terror of moments ago with this impossible tenderness radiating from a creature the world would call a monster on sight. She thought of odd things now, retroactively rearranged into a pattern she hadn't noticed, the fence posts that never seemed to weaken despite the storms. The wood stacked neatly by her shed some mornings, more than she remembered splitting. The strange, comforting sense she'd had on her worst nights that she wasn't quite as alone out here as she should have been. The scraping, she breathed. At my window. That was you. Something like embarrassment crossed his face, startlingly boyish beneath the gray pallor and old scars. I check the perimeter every night. Habit. I didn't think you'd notice. I did. Her voice was quieter now, some of the terror bleeding out of it, replaced by something more complicated, curiosity, and beneath that, unwillingly, gratitude. I thought I was losing my mind. You're not. He took another step back, putting more distance between them, as though every inch closer to her cost him something. You should go inside. Lock the doors. What's out there tonight? It isn't finished hunting. Wait. The word left her before she'd decided to say it. He paused, half-turned toward the tree-line, rain running down the strange landscape of his face. You could have let it happen. You could have walked away and let those things. She couldn't finish the sentence. Why didn't you? Ronan was quiet for a long moment, the rain drumming a slow rhythm against the porch roof, against the ruined earth, against the silent stretching taut between them. When he finally answered, his voice carried a weight that made her chest ache in a way she didn't fully understand yet. Because for 3 years, I forgot what it felt like to want to protect something more than I wanted to survive. His gaze held hers, unflinching despite everything fragile and frightened in it. You reminded me. And I don't think I can go back to forgetting. He turned then, moving toward the tree-line with that same careful, restrained grace, and Lily found herself calling after him before she could stop herself. Will you come back? Ronan paused at the edge of the light, half swallowed by shadow, half illuminated by the porch bulb's yellow glow, a perfect, painful metaphor for everything he was. He didn't turn around. I never left, he said. I just stayed where you couldn't see me. And then the darkness took him whole, and Lily stood alone on her porch in the rain, ankle throbbing, heart hammering with something that wasn't. She thought about the neat stacks of firewood she'd attributed to her own tired memory. She thought about 3 years of solitary vigilance in a forest full of monsters, undertaken by someone who was, by every right the world would grant him, supposed to be one of them. By morning, the rain had softened to mist, and Lily walked the perimeter of her property with her camera slung around her neck for the first time in months, some old instinct stirring back to life. She found the marks where he'd fought, gouged earth, a snapped sapling, the dragged trail where he'd hauled the fallen creature's body far from her cabin so she wouldn't have to see it. And near the tree line, half hidden beneath a fern, she found something that stopped her cold, a small, weathered photograph, water-stained and curling at the edges, of a man in a military uniform, smiling, achingly ordinary, standing beside a woman who wasn't her, but who had her same dark hair, the same stubborn set to her jaw. She was still staring at it, questions crowding her throat, when a twig snapped behind her. She spun around, camera falling against her chest, and found herself face to face with Ronan again, except this time, in the gray light of morning, she could see something she'd missed in last night's shadows and rain. Something that made her blood run cold. His left hand, hanging at his side, had begun to change. The veins beneath the skin had darkened overnight, spreading further up his forearm than they'd been hours before, and his eyes, his warm, achingly human eyes, held a flicker of something desperate and afraid. "Lily," he said, his voice tight with a warning he didn't want to give. "You need to get inside. Now. Whatever's about to happen, no." She stopped an arm's length away, close enough now to see the tremor running through him, close enough to see the way his human eye, still warm, still achingly present, fought against whatever was spreading beneath his skin. "Tell me what's happening. Tell me how to help you." "You can't." The words came out strangled, half swallowed by something guttural trying to claw its way up his throat. He staggered back a step, putting distance between them, one hand braced against a pine trunk hard enough that bark splintered beneath his fingers. "There's no cure, Lily. There's no treatment. There's just management. Control. And I haven't fed the part of me that needs controlling in 3 days, because I was watching your cabin instead of hunting, and now." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Lily's stomach dropped as understanding crashed over her. He'd been so focused on protecting her that he'd neglected whatever grim ritual kept the monster inside him leashed. Guilt speared through her, sharp and sudden. "This is my fault." "No." His voice cracked with something fierce despite the way his body was betraying him. "This was my choice. I'd make it again." His knees buckled slightly, and he caught himself against the tree, breath coming in ragged, wet gasps that sounded far too much like the creatures from the night before. "You need to run. Get in the cabin, bar the door, and don't come out until sunrise no matter what you hear me say. I might not sound like myself. I'm not leaving you out here alone. Lily. You didn't leave." Her voice shook, but she held her ground, camera still clutched against her chest like a talisman. "Last night. You could have walked away and let me die, and you didn't. So don't you dare ask me to do the thing you refused to do." Something in his expression shattered, grief and terror and a desperate, aching tenderness all at once, before his whole body seized, spine arching, a sound tearing out of him that was half human scream and half something far older, far hungrier. He dropped to his knees in the wet earth, hands clawing at the ground, and when he lifted his face to her again, one eye had gone entirely black, pupil swallowing iris and white alike. "Run," he snarled, and this time the word came out wrong, layered with something guttural beneath it. Lily ran, not away, but toward the cabin, flinging the door open and grabbing the only thing she could think of that might matter, the small metal box her grandfather had kept locked in his desk drawer, the one she'd found months ago and never opened, labeled in his shaking handwriting simply as. Her hands shook as she wrenched it open. Inside, a syringe, amber-colored liquid catching the gray morning light, and a folded note in her grandfather's familiar scrawl. Asterisk compound stabilizes the conversion. Buys time. Not a cure, a mercy. Use it only if he asks you to, or if you have no other choice. He'll know what it means. Walt asterisk. She burst back outside just as Ronan let out another anguished cry, his body racked with convulsions, the transformation visibly winning ground across his skin, his shoulders, the terrible dark spreading like ink through water. He was fighting it, she could see that, could see the sheer, brutal will it took to hold himself back from lunging at her, but he was losing, and they both knew it. "Ronan." She dropped to her knees in front of him, syringe trembling in her outstretched hand. "My grandfather left this for you. He said it would buy you time. Tell me what to do." His remaining human eye found hers, wide with disbelief, with something that looked achingly like hope breaking through the agony. "Walt kept that?" All these years? He knew this day might come. Her voice broke. Please, Ronan. Tell me what to do. The neck, he gasped, voice fracturing between syllables. Left side. Do it fast, I won't be able to hold still much longer. Lily's hands were shaking so hard she nearly dropped the syringe twice, but she forced herself steady, forced herself to remember every ounce of resolve that had kept her alive since the world fell apart. She pressed the needle to the gray-veined skin of his throat and pushed the plunger down, and Ronan's whole body went rigid, a strangled sound tearing from him that was pain and relief tangled together. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, agonizingly, the black bled back out of his eye. The darkened veins in his arms began to recede, retreating like a tide pulling back from shore. His ragged breathing steadied, degree by degree, until he was simply a man again, exhausted, trembling, kneeling in the mud with tears he probably couldn't explain cutting tracks through the dirt on his face. It worked, Lily whispered, disbelief and relief crashing through her in equal measure. For now. Ronan's voice was hoarse, but it was voice, warm and human and unmistakably present. He lifted his head, and when their eyes met, something passed between them that neither of them had words for yet: gratitude, wonder, the fragile beginning of something neither of them had expected to find in a world this broken. Your grandfather. He really left that. For me. He believed you were worth saving. Lily's own eyes stung, grief and hope tangling together in her chest. I think I understand why now. Ronan reached up, hesitant, and brushed a strand of rain-damp hair from her face with a hand that was no longer gray at the knuckles, no longer a stranger's hand. His touch was gentle, reverent, the touch of someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to be allowed tenderness and was terrified of losing it again. That compound isn't permanent, he said quietly. It'll buy weeks, maybe months, if I'm careful. But eventually. Then we find another way. The words left her with a fierceness that surprised her. You've spent 3 years protecting a home that wasn't even yours to protect. Let me help you find a way to keep it, for good. Something broke open in his face then, some wall he'd built around himself over 3 years of solitary exile, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked less like a man caught between two worlds and more like someone daring, cautiously, to believe he might belong in this one. I don't know if that's possible, he admitted. Neither did I, about a lot of things. Lily managed a small, trembling smile. And yet here we are. They stayed like that for a long moment, kneeling together in the mud and mist, the forest quiet around them in a way that felt different now, not the hollow silence of isolation, but something gentler, something that felt almost like peace. Ronan's hand found hers, careful, questioning, and when she laced her fingers through his without hesitation, something settled in his chest that had been restless for 3 long, lonely years. There's a research outpost, he said finally, quietly, 2 days north. Before everything fell apart, they were working on cases like mine. Full stabilization, not just a delay. I've heard rumors it might still be operational, survivors, scientists, people trying to undo some of what the world did to itself. His thumb traced slow, absent circles against her knuckles. I never had a reason to go looking. Until now. Then we go together, Lily said, without a single flicker of doubt. Ronan searched her face for a long moment, as if trying to memorize the shape of her certainty, the audacity of a woman offering to walk beside a man the world would call a monster into unknown danger, simply because she'd chosen to see the person underneath. Whatever he found there seemed to steady something deep inside him. Okay, he said softly. Together. Behind them, the sun finally broke through the clouds, spilling gold light across the wet forest floor, catching in Lily's dark hair and glinting off the fading gray at Ronan's temples like something being slowly, painstakingly reclaimed. They rose from the mud hand in hand, two people stitched together by grief and rescue and impossible circumstance, standing at the edge of a story that was only just beginning. There would be dangers ahead, the outpost might be gone, the science might fail, the compound might not hold as long as they hoped, and the world outside Black Hollow Ridge was still full of things that wanted them both dead in different ways. But for the first time in 3 years, Ronan didn't feel like he was fighting alone. And for the first time in 8 months, Lily didn't feel like she was healing in isolation. She turned to gather supplies from the cabin, pausing at the door to look back at him one more time, silhouetted against the rising sun, still achingly caught between two worlds, but choosing, in this moment and every moment after, to stand in the one that included her. "Ronan," she called softly. He looked up, and something in his expression, open, unguarded, quietly hopeful, told her he already knew what she was about to say, and that he needed to hear it anyway. "Whatever happens on that road north," she said, "I'm glad you never left." A smile broke across his face then, small and disbelieving and entirely human, the kind of smile that belonged to a man who'd spent 3 years believing he'd forfeited the right to want anything for himself, and had just discovered, kneeling in the mud outside a stranger's cabin, that he hadn't. If you want to know whether Ronan and Lily make it to that outpost, whether love can hold together what a broken world keeps trying to tear apart, subscribe now and stay close, because their story is only getting started, and you won't want to miss where the road north leads them next.